Ladies and gentlemen, this is Richard Patrick.
So this evening we're looking at why we think our testimonies are not that exciting. I know that won't apply to everybody because some people have got very exciting testimonies, but I know for a lot of us here they're not very exciting. It's a little bit of a sensitive subject because it's so personal to each of us. But it's the most important thing any of us can share. I'm going to say this first before anyone switches off. This is going to be more of like a workshop, like on how to tell our testimonies and what to include and what to be careful of. If you have your testimony down pat, that's great because I think we're going to have an opportunity to share that later in the series. So we'll be picking on you. I'm also going to start by saying that we're a really diverse bunch of people who all have incredible stories to tell. And please, if you were a murderer who has come to know the Lord, then please don't take offence at our moans that our testimonies are boring. We are just a bit in awe of people who have had such an obvious transformation of their life because of Christ. I mean, only Christians would be jealous of those who've been drug addicts or murderers or homeless or abused. We feel a little bit inadequate compared to those great turnarounds in people's lives, which I know is completely ridiculous, as I know that those with exciting testimonies rather wish they hadn't had to go through what they've gone through. And I know that some of them have said to me that they would trade their hardships for being raised in a Christian home in a heartbeat. So I also want to say that having a Christian heritage is a real blessing, and you need to be thankful for your parents raising you in that way. I'm very thankful for my mum and my dad and my grandma and the fact that they all love God and that I've learned so much from them as they've been raised. And although it doesn't sound exciting when you're comparing it to like mass transformations, it's a real blessing to you people. Like, it's a nice thing. It's not a bad thing. No. In the church, we do this really stupid thing where we sort of rank and compare ourselves to other Christians. Like by our skills and how holy we think we are. We're usually in awe of those that have skills that we don't, and feel a bit pants because we don't know some of the things that the really holy people do. You know what I mean? We're a little bit guilty of deciding where we fit in the church hierarchy and then getting stuck there. Here's a diagram I drew. So we have God at the top. That's good. It's a good start. He's really super holy. Then there are missionaries, and they're basically as holy as God because they give up everything for God and live in little mud huts and tell people that don't speak their language about Jesus. I don't think I could do that. It's a little far out of my reach. And then there are like church people like Pete Reed, and whenever they go, God shows up, so they're really holy. And we're like, well, we could never be like that. They've got real gifts. And then there are church workers who have given up everything, again, to follow God, and they've dedicated their lives. And I know I'm sometimes guilty of thinking I'm not clever enough or educated enough to be like them. And then we have people with really exciting testimonies. They have a lot to offer God, a lot more than I do. I don't really have anything interesting to say. They're equal to evangelists that like go up to people they don't even know and tell them about Jesus, and I don't really fancy doing that either. And then there's me. I'm not great at any of those things, so my conversion isn't very important, and I'm not a very valued member of the church, and I don't really have anything to offer. I can't sing or preach or play the piano. I wasn't a criminal either, and I was raised in a Christian home. I don't have exciting gifts like other people, and I certainly don't have anything to shout about my conversion. My testimony isn't very exciting. Now, I bet like 90% of us would maybe put ourselves in that bottom category without even thinking about it. And I know the view I have of myself isn't the view that other people have of me. Like, people are like, oh, you're so confident and talking, and I'm like, I'm so scared. And I don't feel like I'm very good at it either. But actually, that's a load of rubbish. And it looks more like that. There's this really great verse in Colossians where they're talking about everyone being equal in God's eyes, and that verse is up there. Yet now he has reconciled you to himself through the death of Christ in his physical body. As a result, he's brought you into his own presence, and you are holy and blameless as you stand before him without a single fault. He said that to like a church, not to an individual. So everyone as holy as everyone else. So that's exciting. In the eyes of God, we are all equal. You aren't more or less holy because of your past. Your testimony of being raised in a Christian home probably won't impact on a hardened criminal who thinks you've had a cushy life, but it will impact on somebody who's had similar life experiences to you. This time of young adulthood can be a time of waiting and not quite yet. It can be hard living in a period of interim, waiting for your great calling, or feeling as if we don't have a lot to offer because everyone has something greater. A lot of us here are only in Northampton for like a small period of time or an in-between time, whilst planning to move on at some point. I don't think it's any coincidence that so many of us never intended to come here in the first place, or have ended up staying. This time, I believe, is a time for building us up, for growing our skills. And our testimony is one of the most powerful things that we have in our toolkit for sharing God's love. As unless people are brave enough to call you a liar to your face, which not many of them are, they can't question your experience of God and of God's love. And it's essential we aren't frightened to share this story with others. Although we aren't all blessed with the gift of evangelism and don't feel that we are called to spread the gospel, we are all witnesses to what Jesus has done in our own lives. It's the story of your life. The Bible is a storybook. It's not filled with lectures or outlines or sermons. It's essentially people writing down stories of what happened to people. And that's what your testimony is, the story of what happened to you. And that's why it's so powerful. Our stories are just as important as what's in the Bible, and they're a continuation of God's work from that point. So over the next term, we're going to be looking at how we equip ourselves for the big world and the scary topic of evangelism. So next week at Academy, we'll be doing Good Christian. So if you have questions, or not next week, the week after, sorry. We're doing the Good Christian. So if you have any questions that you're scared of being asked, make sure you've told Ruth or Facebook inbox the group. And then we'll get to put it into practice in the noise, which is really exciting. And then the week after, Rob is hopefully going to wash away all of our fears about evangelism. So it's all very exciting. So tonight we're working on our testimonies, and so that when the occasion presents itself, we will be ready. It's becoming more and more important to share our faith story with people. People share their life stories with their friends and with complete strangers sometimes. There's this phenomenon on the internet called like Draw My Life, where people have been drawing like the highlights and lowlights of their life on the internet. Like there's no God in it, they're just sharing their life with people. And I think if those people can share their lives, then why can't we? Like why can't we be brave enough to do it? And I think, so if you're talking to people about your life, I think it's okay to mention Jesus. He's not taboo, and it's not, if it's your life you're talking about. If Jesus is part of your life, then it's not like you're forcing it in. It can come up casually in conversation too. I know in church we get people to tell it from the front, like come and tell your testimony, and you like stand there with your paper and like, I was raised in a Christian home, and then when I was old enough I gave my life to Jesus. That kind of occasion is not likely to happen while you're at work. Like here, come to the front of the office and tell everybody about Jesus. I don't think that's going to happen. It would be awesome and petrifying all at the same time. I don't know if I know what to say. But what is more likely, someone might ask you, like on finding out that you went to church at the weekend, and they ask you if you're religious. Like you've got an in, you could be like, no, I'm not religious, but I believe in Jesus, or like this happened to me, and then I've started like questioning why I went alpha or something like that. I don't know what your story is. I know I was once talking to somebody about a christening, and they were surprised when I said I hadn't been christened, and they were like, but you're a Christian? And I was like, yeah, I am. But because of that, I got to explain like a little bit of my story and like why I was a Christian even though I hadn't been christened, and got to explain it to them. Now, I wish I had an exciting story like that person then got down on their knees and gave their life to Jesus, but they didn't, and they got, and then they walked off. But I still like took the opportunity, and I think that the opportunity doesn't always look how I guess we have the idea of the testimony being like something you read out, but actually it's just sharing your life with people. I had another experience that made me worry a little bit last week. I have a lovely friend at work who's the lady I'm covering maternity leave for, and we got chatting, and I saw that she's friends on Facebook with the wife of our old assistant pastor, just a long link, at our last church. I said something like, how do you know her? And she told me that the assistant pastor used to work with her husband. Asking the question of me, I replied that he was the assistant pastor of our last church. Her eyebrows shot up, and she said, we had no idea he was a Christian until he quit his job to go and be a missionary. I was like, it was such a shock to both of them, her and her husband. And without thinking of like the correct response, I went, that's not good. And she just went, no, it's not. And I was like, oh, because I thought, she's not a Christian, and she doesn't know that he's supposed to be sharing his faith. She doesn't know it's bad, but she knew that there was something fundamentally wrong with somebody claiming that they had a relationship with God and they didn't even know about it. I know that we all don't feel like we're very good at mentioning Jesus, and I get worried that I'm going to offend somebody. But the New Testament urges us to speak the gospel whenever the opportunity. I've forgotten about these things. Whenever the opportunity presents itself, so there's these two lovely verses, which I'm not going to read out because they're not there. I don't do it all the time because I'm not forcing anything, it's just part of who I am. I'm not a natural evangelist in that I don't often see the opportunities and I often chicken out. But sometimes talking about the church and Jesus just comes out because it's so much a part of my life. Okay, so we're going to look at Paul's testimony as a good example. Yes, it was a miraculous, amazing transformation, but we're just going to hit like the way he structured it. It's very long. It's the whole of Acts 22, so I was not going to read that whole lot out. But what he does, basically, is he talks about his life before he was a Christian. Paul describes what he thought and did before he became a believer. So this is when he's in court, so it must be a really scary situation. And when you're thinking about writing your testimony, you've got to give specific and appropriate examples of what your life was like before Christ. It might just be that you didn't really know God, or that you had like issues in your family, or I don't know what it might be. But when you become a Christian, there are changes in your life even if you don't notice them. So you might want to ask your friends and family, like, what was I like before I became a Christian? Like, what did I have any issues? If you don't know what they are, if it was that long ago, I don't know what it will be specifically for you. But the examples that you give will establish you as a credible witness in the minds of non-Christians. But I would avoid a religious focus, like, you want to make it about Jesus and your need for him, but not so much like church, like church activities that I don't really know how to say it without being mean. Well, some people have a negative view of church, and some people have a negative experience of church. And if you're going on and on about church, they might not be listening to you. So if you focus on your relationship with Jesus, you are engaging with people on a relational level and not on a religious level. That's what I'm trying to say. Also, when you're talking about your life before, it doesn't need to be a blah 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 plan of everything you ever did wrong. If you did lots of stuff wrong, you don't need to go into the nitty-gritty details. Like, I don't know, if you were very promiscuous, they don't need, and his name was Dave, and we did it like 20 times, and in this room and there, and it was terrible, I was annoyed, like, they don't need to know. Like, just the fact that you were promiscuous is probably enough of a fact. The reason I say don't focus on that too much is because, like, you don't want to come across like you're bragging about it, like it was like a badge of honour or something. It's like something you're not proud of, hopefully. And then he focuses next on like what happened. So he's talking about, I fell to the ground and I heard a voice saying like, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So he says like how he became a Christian. So your goal when you're talking to somebody is just to say like, if you can remember the time that you gave your life to God, your goal would be to be like for me, I remember I was in a church service and the lady was talking about feeling, I can't exactly remember what she was talking about, but it was about feeling stuff, and I felt like my hands were on fire. I was obviously experiencing the Holy Spirit, and she was like, if you want more of that, like come front. exciting. And I just remember praying the prayer, so I would say that at that moment, Jesus came really real to me, and I touched him into my life. But it's different for everybody. Everyone has a completely different experience. But the how, and then you want to be after, what happened next. So then he says, he tells you about what Jesus told him to do next, that he went to Jerusalem, and that he said the people won't accept your testimony, but then he's explaining how he's ended up in custody. But Paul explained basically that becoming a believer changed his life. And your goal is to explain specific ways Christ has changed your life, to show that having Christ in your life really does make a difference. It's not about just going to church on Sunday and being nice all the time. I know Pete Greig said if that was all it was about, he's not interested. It's that. What's the point of that? You can't just try and be nice in your own strength. You can't be smiley and be all I'm a nice person all the time and I go to church and that's it. There's got to be more to it than that. This one website I read said, avoid generic statements such as, I have so much peace now, which I kind of get. They don't be vague about how you feel now, but actually if you are at the beginning of your life, for me, the beginning of my testimony would be that I'm really anxious. I do have so much peace now, it's relevant, but don't be vague and wishy-washy about the whole thing, because then people aren't going to see the difference. You want to communicate your story in such a way to show the listener that your life is different and more meaningful with Christ than without. So these are they're also exciting testimonies, but they're really short. So when the blind man is telling people what happens to him when he's not blind anymore, he just says, I was blind and now I can see. And that's just as much of a valid testimony because it's what it was like before and what it's like now. So you can share your testimony without well, I was raised in a Christian home and then I did this and then I went to that. You need to just be telling if you don't have lots of time, one really relevant thing that has changed in your life. It doesn't have to be the moment your road to Damascus moment. It just needs to be some difference that God's made. And then there's the Samaritan woman who's I like how her testimony is a question. This amazing thing happened to me. Can it be true? I'm not sure. And then the people go, yes, this is true. Which I quite like. But my point is, they don't have to be particularly long. You don't have to speak for ages, which is what I'm trying not to do. These are my top 5 tips for writing your testimony. To prepare, number 1, to prepare. It's really hard, if you see in a conversation to maybe mention Jesus or your life or in any way, to then suddenly think on the spot of things that God has done for you, especially if it's not a dramatic change in your life. So my suggestion is, take time and write your testimony down. Just highlights and lowlights of your life, things that have been really good and things that have been really hard and how you got through them with God and things that you haven't, that you've struggled with. And I would suggest writing a long one that can be used in a church service to encourage other Christians, and then writing a really short one that if you were stuck in a lift with somebody and you had from the bottom floor to the top floor to tell them about Jesus, that you've got something that you vaguely remember writing it down somewhere. So that's my first tip. Tip number 2, the point of the testimony is to talk about Jesus and the life he's made in your life, and that's the focus. And that is why the criminal to Christ testimonies are so powerful, because the before and after is so dramatic. This is true in many things. Think of any home makeover show. They like to show you how bad it was before and how beautiful it looks now. And everyone loves a good before and after. If you're struggling to think about the difference God has made in your life, and you can talk about how you've always been aware of God, and say that when you reach such and such an age and you wanted to have a relationship with God yourself, it's okay if you don't remember the date you accepted Jesus into your life, but try and focus on what you have in your life thanks to God. And I would say though, if you can't think of any way Jesus has changed your life, in any way, You need to really think about that. Because it should have changed it even just a little bit. And my third point is that I can't stand testimonies that so 30 years ago, this happened, and that's great. I became a Christian and that's been wonderful ever since, because unless they've had the most blessed life ever, there has got to have been stuff that happened between now and 30 years ago, and that's the stuff that people care about, the new stuff, the relevant stuff. So when you're thinking about your testimony and you gave your life to God when you were 3, try and think of something that's happened since that God's helped you through, the difference He's made in something a little more recently. I just think life doesn't stop when you become a Christian, although on one hand it does, you die and then you come back to that, but you don't, actual real life doesn't stop. And you have this new life in Christ, and your relationship with God is a real living relationship with highs and lows, so include them, even if it's something small. This means that you'll need to update your testimony from time to time, so if you wrote your testimony about 5 or 6 years ago, you might want to dig it out, add something new to the bottom. That's another reason why it's helpful to have it written down, because if you've written it down and then you've got a little record, you can just update it rather than having to write the whole thing again and be oh. And it's also really nice to be able to look back on it and see what God has done in your life. It's a really good reminder, even your own testimony, of actually God's been really, really at work in my life, even though it doesn't always seem like it. Yes, that's that point. And the fourth point is, it's in the delivery. I did hear once somebody share their testimony. It was this once was a bit, I'm who's listening to that guy? I'm it's okay to be excited about God. Even in a monotone, sad voice, the best news isn't going to sound very good. And so when you're talking about Jesus, who's awesome, you have permission to be excited. Don't be crazy excited. Don't be weird. But a little enthusiasm makes it easier to listen to. And if they're listening to you being excited about it, it's contagious. You don't want to be ashamed. Don't want to, even if you're scared, try not to seem ashamed of it. Because if you're, then they'll be oh, why is she so cagey about talking about it? It's exciting. It's the good news, not the okay news. Cheesy, I know. And then my fifth point is try not to use religious jargon. We do it all the time. This is okay for the ones you read out in church. We do a bit of redeemed and salvation. But I would try and avoid scary words that condemn people in when you're, especially if you're in a relational context and these are people you're going to have to see again. You don't want to be then God overcame all my sin and I was such a terrible person because I didn't know Jesus, and you're kind of telling them that they're a terrible person, which, although they are not saved in Christ, they might be quite a nice person and they might not think that they need God. So I'd ease off on scary religious words. Right, that's just my point. So these are my 3 things to remember. You want your before, your how, and your after. So if you take nothing away from tonight and you're thinking about it, just try and focus on the before and after, because that's the big exciting transformation. But it doesn't have to be, it's your before and after. It doesn't have to be, I don't know, you don't have to play it out and make it more exciting than it was. It's your life, and your testimony is going to speak to somebody who's had a similar life to you. Even yes, it's lovely that people can have these exciting ones, but really, everyone's a miracle. Everyone that's saved, it's a blessing, and I think we need to count our blessings before we start getting all